We're delighted to welcome you tonight on this very breezy evening for the Express Adda. My colleague Vaidyanathan Iyer, who's National Affairs Editor, and we are especially privileged to have with us as our guest P Chidambaram. In over 3 decades of public life, Mr. Chidambaram has been at the center of change. He's participated in it, he's presided over it, he's more often than not also been the change maker. He was part of the Narasimha Rao government that opened up the Indian economy in the early 1990s. His was a dream budget that consecrated that opening in 1997. In 10 years of the UPA government, he held 2 of the most key portfolios. He was finance minister twice, and he was home minister at a particularly precarious predicament, both for Mumbai and the country, after the Mumbai blasts in 2008. After the UPA lost power in 2014, luckily for us, Mr. Chidambaram went back to a role that he had played earlier in the opposition. He's a columnist with the Indian Express. His columns are not a defense of his record in government. They are not an explanation for it. They are, on the other hand, a forthright engagement, an unafraid engagement with the issue of the day every week. Mr. Chidambaram, in the spirit of your columns and in the spirit of the Express...
Can I interrupt you and begin by apologizing to all my friends here? We were an hour late in Delhi taking off, and it took me an hour and 20 minutes to negotiate the traffic, but I profusely apologize. I'm very, very careful about being punctual, but I apologize once again.
So in the spirit of your columns, your writing, and in the spirit of the Express, could I begin by hopefully putting you in a spot? 2 days ago, right here in Bombay, in the Maharashtra Assembly, the AIMIM MLA Waris Pathan was suspended for the rest of the budget session. And the Congress, your party, played a leading role in that episode. It ganged up with other parties, that is the BJP, the NCP, and the Shiv Sena. And his ostensible crime was that he refused to chant Bharat Mata Ki Jai. Now, I would like you to respond on how you look at this in the light of 2 things. One, your own party colleague, Mr. Digvijay Singh, today has sort of exonerated the Congress and the Assembly, and he has sort of justified the suspension. And the voices from your party are in fact expressing resentment against the politics of the AIMIM. But you, on the other hand, earlier, not in the context of this episode, you have talked about a nationalism that is muscle flexing, a nationalism that is chest thumping, and you have said that nobody should be defining what nationalism means for the other. So how would you look at this episode in the Maharashtra Assembly?
Well, I haven't read what my friend Digvijay ji has said, but just as his views are personal, my view has to be personal. Obviously, I can't speak for the party on this matter. Jawaharlal Nehru explained Bharat Mata Ki Jai by saying the Bharat Mata means the people of India, and it's victory to the people of India. I don't think anyone has any quarrel or qualms about saying victory to the people of India. But when a political party appropriates that slogan and says, this is the definition of patriotism, those who say it are patriotic, those who will not say it are not patriotic, but I reject that definition. You cannot define a patriot on whether he raises a slogan along with others or not. I think on more careful reflection, the Assembly should not have suspended that MLA. That's my view.
So, taking it further, across party lines, there doesn't seem to be any differentiated opinions on this aspect of, what nationalism or what patriotism is all about. as it happened in Maharashtra, or across party lines, everybody were together. In fact, Congress actually goaded the decision, prodded the BJP Sena government to take such a decision. Do you think the lines are getting really blurred today, and is it getting more and more polarized?
I hope not. I hope the lines are not blurred. I hope that every party does not join a chorus. But in the social media and in the print media, I read and hear a number of voices which caution against this kind of muscle flexing, chest thumping patriotism. In fact, I saw a phrase somewhere yesterday or today. This is the ugly patriot preaching patriotism.
Mr. Chidambaram, if I could take what Vedi said further, is the Congress getting spooked by the BJP's appropriation of the nationalism plank?
Well, I don't think the BJP will succeed in appropriating the nationalism plank. We have other powerful voices. Kanaya Kumar in the JNU is another powerful voice. There are other voices in other universities, other colleges. Just because the media doesn't give space to those voices, it does not mean those voices are stilled or can be stilled. I think we are all patriots. We all love our country. We all cherish our beliefs. But I refuse to be told that unless you raise a slogan, you're not a patriot. I would have no hesitation at all in saying Bharat Mata Ki Jai. But I can't dictate to another person to say, unless you say Bharat Mata Ki Jai, you're not a patriot. I think on calm reflection, most thinking people will agree with what I say.
Mr. Chidambaram, you just said that the assembly was wrong to suspend this MLA, and that the slogan or the chant cannot be forced on somebody. In my book, this is probably the sixth issue in recent times on which you have taken a different stance from your party. Your party has still not said this on this issue. The other issues, if I can just count them out to you.
Why do you say my party's view is different if one party has not said anything so far?
No, your party, for instance, if Digvijay Singh speaks for his party, or if you speak for your party, now that's...
I said these at this stage are only his view and my view.
Yeah. So, but on Afzal Guru, you had a different view. You recently expressed that there were grave doubts about the nature of his involvement.
I think you,
in the
like
conspiracy.
everyone else, has misunderstood it. I said, as a member of the government which prosecuted Afzal Guru, I am bound by the judgment of the Supreme Court. But if another person
has an honest opinion,
holds an honest belief that the degree of involvement of Afzal Guru was not correctly determined, or that the punishment imposed in his case was disproportionate, he has a right to hold that belief. He has a different opinion.
but Mr. Chidambaram, this would not be your party's position again on Afzal Guru. So if I could just...
Nor is it my position. I said if another person holds an
But
honest belief,
Yeah.
he's entitled to hold that honest belief.
So on Salman Rushdie, you went further. You said that the Rajiv Gandhi government was wrong to have banned the book when it did.
In hindsight,
Yeah.
looking back 25 years, although the context was very different then and the context is very different today, I think banning books doesn't serve any purpose.
On Section 377 again, you have consistently held that it should be decriminalized. This is not something that your party has said so far.
No, I don't think so. I think that is my party's view. The Cabinet of India decided not to appeal the judgment of the High Court. In fact, the cabinet instructed the Attorney General to tell the Supreme Court that the judgment of the High Court was right, but the Government of India's top law officer would assist the Supreme Court in hearing the appeal. I don't think my party's view on Article 377 was different then or now.
But when the court, in a real sense, lobbed the ball back to the legislature didn't do anything about it.
Because we did not have a majority. Please remember, if the people of India had given us 282, there's much more we could have done.
But there are
Those who have been given 282 are wasting their mandate.
two more issues, Mr. Chidambaram, where your position is more liberal than your party. On AFSPA, you have held that AFSPA must be replaced by a more humane law, and that there would be a change from Manipur to J&K if AFSPA was repealed.
The party has not taken a view on that either. You seem to think that if the party has not spoken, it must be a different view. I'm afraid you must disabuse yourself of that notion. The party has not taken a view on AFSPA. There are different voices within the party because it's a democratic party. And what I said about AFSPA, I'm not saying it now. I said it even when I was in government.
Yeah.
And there are a number of people in government who tended to agree with me. There are a number of people who took a different view. That doesn't mean the party's view is a different view. You seem to be putting all your questions on the basis that if the party has not spoken, it must be a different view.
No, my basis is that the party was in government and the party didn't do anything about this.
But that doesn't mean it is a different view. If you're in government, it doesn't mean you can do all that you want to do. We never had a majority. In the first UPA, we had 145. In a house of 542. In the second UPA, we had 206. In a house of 542. Why don't you ask yourself the question, with 145, how much did we do in the first 5 years? How did we deliver 8.5% growth, the highest 5-year growth in India's history? How did we deliver 7.5% growth in 10 years, the highest decadal growth in India's history? I think we should ask how a minority government was able to deliver so much.
Mr. Chidambaram, coming back to, say, the growth rate, of higher growth path that under the UPA first term and second term you had achieved. In this new government, you have taken a very insistent or strong stance on GST rate being constitutionalized.
Not I, my party.
The party.
When the party agrees with me, you don't acknowledge that. When the party is silent, you say the party is taking a different view.
But the party has also made it public that it was based on the advice of Mr. Chidambaram.
Well, I think that is very flattering, but that's not. I don't think that's correct.
But do you think that this, when GST is seen as a remarkable indirect tax reform, a game changer, why is it that you're not looking at an alternative and you are sticking to the position that it has to be constitutionalized? Is there any other way that this can be addressed?
If there are other ways, the other ways can be found only if the government engages the Congress party in a discussion. The only engagement was when Mrs. Gandhi and Dr. Manmohan Singh were invited by the Prime Minister. They met the Prime Minister and gave him the party's objections. The Prime Minister and others who were present said, yes, we will reflect on it and come back. They are still coming back to us. For the last 4 months, they have not come back to us. Without an engagement, how do you explore alternatives?
But having been the finance minister, what would you think could be a compromise where you don't have to stick to a constitutionalized?
Why should a right solution always be a compromise? Of the 3 objections that we have raised, practically everyone has endorsed 2 objections. Why doesn't the government say we accept those 2 objections? On the 3rd objection, the only reason, quote unquote reason, which the government seems to be giving is, there is no precedent. But that's wrong. The very bill introduced by Mr. Jaitley, in one clause, has put 1% in the Constitution Amendment Bill. That very bill is a precedent. If you're looking for another precedent, Article 276 is the precedent where, for professional tax, the Constitution imposes a cap. Therefore, the precedent argument is no argument. If there's any other argument, the government must engage the Congress party, and then the Congress party may or may not consider alternatives. But without an engagement, how do you explore alternatives?
To bring you back to your party, Mr. Chidambaram, in your column in the book that you wrote after the Delhi election, you said that the party needs a new script, that the Delhi defeat shows that the party needs a new script, and you offered 3 suggestions in that column. You said, 1, that there should be a numero uno, but there has to be an appearance of collective leadership, and your sentence was that even King Arthur had his table. The second suggestion you said was that the party had to constitute and reconstitute committees at the local levels, at the block, district, ward levels. And the third suggestion you gave was that the party must find ways of communicating with its cadres and the people daily. Those were your words. Now, it has been over a year since the Delhi verdict. Do you think your party has listened to you? Do you think any of these changes have been made?
The party listens not only to me, the party listens to a number of people. And the party then implements whatever the leadership believes can be done at that time. I'm sure the party listens to me as well as it listens to many others. I'm sure it listens to my friend Prithvirajji here. I'm sure it listens to others also. But ultimately, the decision is the party's leadership. Our business is to, in a democratic party, is to raise issues and speak about issues. We are a democratic party. We are not... the Congress party, both in government and outside government, within the broader framework of party discipline, encourages people to speak.
But as a senior leader, when you look at your party, do you think on any of these counts, changes have been made?
Some changes have been made, yes.
So, coming back to another issue which is kind of dominating the headlines over the last month or so is on the Ishrat Jahan case. The previous Home Secretary came out and said that it was an excellent intelligence operation, and where the intelligence bureau lured and caught the 4 alleged LET operatives. So having caught them is the first aspect. But then, as Home Minister, how do you see the encounter that happened? All the 4 were murdered. So what happened? You have the IB, the government, or you have lured and caught hold of those 4 guys? And how does then one explain that not going through a process of law, these guys are terminated?
No, wait a minute. When did the encounter take place?
2002.
Was I the Home Minister at that time?
Sorry, not the Home Minister, but in the affidavits I'm talking about.
No, you were saying you were the Home Minister at that time. I was not the Home Minister at that time. You see, you frame the question wrongly, you will get a wrong answer. What is the issue here? The issue is not whether Ishrat Jahan was a terrorist or not. The issue is, can anyone be killed in a fake encounter? I can give you at least 4 examples in recent times where the government has deliberately framed the debate in the wrong way. The issue, say, in University of Hyderabad was not whether Rohit Vemula was a Dalit or a non-Dalit. The issue there was, can a first-generation learner from a poor background be driven to such desperation by an insensitive university administration that he's forced to commit suicide. So don't frame the question wrongly, you will get wrong answers. The issue in Ishrat Jahan is, assuming Ishrat Jahan was a terrorist, does it give the state the right to kill her in a fake encounter?
Absolutely not.
That is the issue. An issue which this government will not answer, and Mr. Gopal Pillai conveniently omits to answer. Be that as it may, the then Home Secretary, Mr. Gopal Pillai, in August 2013, is on video, and that video is available, it was telecast, completely justifying the second affidavit. Now, of course, that's a liberty to former civil servants. They can change their opinion after retirement. That's not a liberty given to former ministers.
Mr. Chidambaram, you just mentioned Rohit Vemula. In your column that you wrote after this case, the suicide of Rohit Vemula in the Hyderabad Central University, you said that the history of India is the struggle, is the history of the struggle between the entitled and the disentitled. And you said that there is a gathering storm that we are not recognizing. What did you mean by that?
You see, the composition of our universities has changed, and I don't think many of us recognize the change. Except in the southern states and one or two other states where there has been reservation for quite some time. By and large, universities did not give their space to people from the background of Rohit Vemula or Kanaya Kumar. What the UPA did, UPA 2 did, when we introduced 50% reservation in universities, was, I think, the most transformational social change of that period of India's history. I was in the IIM Bangalore a few weeks ago. 50% of the class today is scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and OBC. These boys and girls are bringing a very different kind of experience into the university. Rohit Vemula, Kanaya Kumar bring their childhood experience, the discrimination they faced, the neglect they faced, the struggles of their parents, to the university. Imagine 20 years ago, a boy like Kanaya Kumar becoming the JNUSU president. I don't know if such an example was there, but even if such an example had been there, it would have been a rare case.
JNU has had examples.
It would have been still rare, but Delhi University or other universities. Therefore, their worldview, their experience, their struggles are very different, and that is getting reflected in the university today. This is the storm that is gathering across the country. It is, the evidence of that storm is visible in universities and other public spaces. It's not easy to get 5,000, 10,000 students every third or fourth day on the streets of Delhi. But these students are passionate and they're coming out to the streets of Delhi every third day, every fourth day. That is the gathering storm that I was referring to. And if we ignore the storm, we ignore it at our peril.
So your 1997 budget was called a dream budget, and you picked up the opportunities available then. Today, post the crisis, the world doesn't seem to have really gotten out of a crisis. The world is not growing. So at such times, although we grow at about 7% and estimated to grow at 7% this year, what do you think were the opportunities available ahead of the budget just announced by the finance minister now? What could have been more substantive to take the economy to a higher growth path?
So I don't question the CSO's figures. The CSO is part of the government. I have been part of the government for many, many years. I don't question the integrity of those numbers. But just take a straw vote. How many here feel in their bones that the Indian economy is growing at 7.5% this year? You talk to business persons, you talk to traders, you talk to people who travel with you on trains, on aircraft. 1 out of 10 is unwilling to say that he believes that or he feels that India is growing at 7.5%. If India is growing at 7.5%, why are exports down for 15 months in a row? Why is the IIP's head barely above water? Why is credit growth limping along at about 9%? Why are the figures showing that if you take all firms, sales are down 6%? If you take all manufacturing firms, sales are down 11.5%. So I think there are serious questions, but let's keep that aside. You asked me, what are the major challenges facing Indian economy? I think there are 3. First is aggregate demand. Nothing has been done that addresses the issue of sluggish aggregate demand. The second is private investment. The chief economic advisor himself has admitted that 2 of the 4 engines of economic growth have virtually stalled: exports and private investment. If investors are not willing to invest in India, if domestic investors are not willing to invest in India, that is the problem you should address. And the third problem is exports. I think the government has given up. I don't hear or see the Commerce Minister on exports. 15 months in a row, never in India's history have exports been negative. Yes, global trade has slowed down, but China's exports are still positive. Korea's exports are still positive. Why are we in negative territory for 15 successive months? These are the 3 issues that have to be addressed.
So exactly, of course, these are the challenges that are before the government, and the budget, the finance minister claims or says that he has tried to address it through. One of the big issues that he picked up was agriculture and enormous spend in agriculture that he has talked about, because that is a rural agrarian stress, and it is showing up much more than in urban India. So how do you say the first issue of, say, for instance, reviving private sentiment, private investor sentiment? So what does one do about it in terms of say policies?
Are you asking me or telling me?
I'm asking you, sir.
I don't give free advice. That's the business of the government. The government must come up with proposals and ask us to react. Give me full information. Give me all the data. Let me have access to all the data, and then we can give advice. But full information and all the data is available only to government, not to us.
Mr. Chidambaram, the state that you belong to and the state that you've been an MP from for several times, multiple, 7 or 8 times you've been an MP from Sivaganga. But Tamil Nadu. Now, Tamil Nadu is the home of, was the home of a very, very progressive anti-caste movement. It was probably the first state to have affirmative action. It's got quotas up to 69%, way beyond the 50% that the Supreme Court mandated. It's got one of the best models of public service delivery, very high human development index. What has gone wrong, Mr. Chidambaram? Why is it that Tamil Nadu now makes news for caste violence, for anti-Dalit violence, for intercaste marriages ending in tragedy?
Like in many parts of India, and I wrote about it once, we make our reformers into icons and we junk reforms. It's sad that the state that gave Periyar, E.V. Ramaswamy, who campaigned all his life against caste and for the abolition of caste should have now descended into a virtual state of tribalism. Caste lines are more firmly drawn today than I can ever recall. It happened about a couple of years ago with a 1-year boy in Dharmapuri district. And it's happened again with a Dalit boy and a Tevar girl. I'm truly ashamed of what's happening in Tamil Nadu, especially people who kill because two young people have fallen in love and have married each other, but they belong to different castes. I married outside my caste, and I remember with great pride that E.V. Ramaswamy wrote an editorial in his paper on that day celebrating my marriage outside my caste. But today, 45 years down the line, if people will kill because two young people, boy and a girl belonging to different castes, have married, I think that's truly shameful.
So, coming back to the economy, the banking sector, which we have seen that stressed assets have really been the talking point. Banks do not have money to lend. But if you look at the graph of stressed assets also, it started, say, during the UPA time. The NPAs and, say, giving loans to service interest of the corporates by banks, by public sector banks, started way back. So in terms of just taking on banking reforms with a lot more political conviction, hasn't been really the previous couple of governments also in India. And the situation seems to only deteriorate further. So as far as, say, NPAs are concerned, do you think that it's time now that the government allows banks or looks at very bold measures like doing away with the government character of public sector banks?
You're connecting unconnected dots. NPAs didn't start with UPA. In fact, NPA is a combination of NDA and UPA. In 2002, your paper ran a series of articles, The Great Indian Bank Robbery. The UPA was not in office in 2002. So don't take two facts and connect them. NPAs have turned for the worse after the global recession in 2008. It so happens that the UPA was in office in 2008. But whoever was in office, if there's a global recession, it will affect India. It will affect India's economy. I think it's a self-evident truth that if the economy is on a slower growth path or on a downturn, NPAs will rise. I mean, that's a no-brainer. It doesn't require argument. Because the global economy is not picked up, especially global trade is not picked up, our NPA situation has not improved. In fact, it has deteriorated. You have to classify NPAs into willful defaults and victims of an economic slowdown. I believe that if you take the MSMEs, 95% of MSMEs, micro, small and medium, are victims of an economic slowdown. They have to be helped. You have to have a helping hand. You have to hold their hand until the economy takes a upturn and we come out of this trough. But if there are willful defaulters, of course you must go after the willful defaulters. But I don't think it's correct to say that NPAs have risen or NPAs have fallen and connected to who was in government and who was not in government.
No, the larger point I was trying to make was on banking reform, sir.
Of course there must be banking reforms, but is there a consensus among the people of India that we must privatize our public sector banks? I'm afraid there is no consensus. We have tried to gauge whether there was a consensus on that, But I think if you take a vote in Parliament today, overwhelmingly the Parliament members, and presumably they reflect their constituencies, will say, while you can enlarge the space for private sector banks by licensing more private sector banks, you cannot privatize existing public sector banks. That, I think, is the mood of the country. You can't impose a policy upon an unwilling country.
So one aspect, of course, is privatization or opening up for private investment, the banking, the public sector banks. The other aspect is also about, say, professionalizing bank management. So today we are talking.
Why do you say the bank managements are not professional?
So
bank managers come from the ranks. They are banking professionals all their lives.
No, I'm talking, say for instance, the human resource aspect of, say, public sector banks today. How many people are joining today the public sector banks amongst the bright and the young? Second, you have a big...
Hundreds of them are joining, except that the brighter people have other avenues as well. Why do you say bright people are not joining public sector banks?
Because that's what bank chairmen tell me. When you talk to all bank chairmen, you don't really find...
You should ask the bank chairman, were you a bright young man when you joined the bank?
And the other aspect is of, say, the missing middle. You don't really have, or successive governments haven't really created alternatives for bank managements to rope in private sector or latent talent into the banks.
That's not correct, you see. What did the NDA government do? They said we are going to have a different way of appointment. We had a system by which GMs became EDs and EDs became CMDs. And as long as banks were doing well, that system was hunky-dory. When the economic slowdown took place, that system became a target. So when the NDA government came, they said, we're going to change the system. We're going to bring in people laterally. They made 2 appointments, so-called lateral appointments. One was an ex-public sector banker, so it was not really lateral. One was a private sector banker. But what you forgot to read was, on the day they made the 2 appointments, the finance ministry announced, this new method of appointment will no longer be followed. We revert to the old method of appointment. So that new window of appointment is open only for making 2 appointments. I don't believe there's anything wrong in GMs being considered for EDs and EDs being considered for CMD. To brush all of them and say, none of you is a professional, I don't accept that argument.
If there are any questions from the audience, please do raise your hand and we'll make sure the mic comes to you.
My name is Anil Prabhakar. I am associated with the jewelry industry. When UPA was in power, you tried to impose 1% excise duty on jewelry. And the same thing was repeated in 2012. But in both the cases, there was a rollback on excise duty. And I would like to know, first of all, what were the compulsions on the rollback? And secondly, when the NDA government is doing the same, why you are opposing it? So I would like to seek your views on this.
See, the compulsion in 2012 was, we were running an $88 billion current account deficit. How do you deal with an $88 billion current account deficit? We had to compress demand. And since a huge amount of money was being spent for importing gold, we had to compress demand. The one way to compress demand is to impose an additional duty. But when the current account deficit is under control, when the current account deficit is completely manageable, it's now about 1.2%, there's no justification for imposing additional duties. See, these are indirect taxes, and indirect taxes by definition are regressive. Vaidhi will tell you that. If you want to raise revenues, you must do it through direct taxes, so that those who can afford will pay. But I don't know the pros and cons of the current issue. But all I can say is, At that time, it was absolutely necessary to compress demand so that we could bring the current account deficit to manageable proportions, and therefore we imposed that duty.
Can
Well-
you cite an example of any industry where excise was imposed and later on withdrawn, sir?
Oh, plenty.
Even
Plenty. In 1996, the average excise duty was 40%. Today, the average excise duty is 14% or so. The history of excise and customs is a declining percentage ever since liberalization started. Any number of excise duties have been imposed and withdrawn.
Is the Congress party working on a institutional strategy to counteract the times that you have so graphically described in your book as well? Or are you waiting, is the party waiting for more Kanhaiya Kumars that it can take a ride on? And do you actually see the party going directly to the people like Jayaprakash Narayan did to start an Andolan against the times that, again, you describe as being quite dismal?
Well, obviously, I'm not competent to make pronouncements on behalf of the party. This can only the party leadership can finally speak on what the party will do or will not do. I'm a member of the party, and to the extent that within the framework of party discipline, we are allowed to express our views, I express my views. I think the party is doing a number of right things, but I think the party must do many more right things. That would be my answer. For example, the party is now certainly more active in public spaces. The party is coming out to the streets. The party is coming out to public spaces. The party is willing to engage in debate in the public space, which I think is very welcome. The party is reactivated its youth wing, which I think is very welcome. The party's student wing has become active, which I think is very welcome. But there are many other things the party has to do. And within the party discipline framework, we do express our views on what the party can do and what the party must do.
Mr. Chidambaram, you mentioned 2 or 3 things that you said the party is doing.
Don't you see the visible change? The party is now more visible and more engaging in the public space.
Yeah, so would you also mention 2 or 3 things that you think the party still has to do?
Oh, I think the party must address the building blocks of the party. At the block level, in many places, the party is very weak. There is a shell, but there is no content. So we need to strengthen the block level committees, which is below the district level committee. And we need to make that block level committee where it exists far more representative of the social composition of society.
I'm Deepak Sethi. I'm a business strategy consultant. Mr. Chidambaram, I must confess at the outset that I'm an ardent supporter of your writings.
Thank you.
And you helped me to continue to be a loyalist of the Express Group because of what you write and your thought leadership. The issue that I want to raise right now is the issue of exposure of crass corruption through these sting operations. These operations have been kind of put out on the videos and on the media, and it's revolting. But right after that, what you hear from the people who are involved, that this is about political victimization. That seems to be the standard response that comes through. My question to you is, what would be your advice? How does an ordinary citizen who gets exposed to these kind of crass and gross, exposures, how does he process them, especially when the comment that comes is that this is political victimization? And I want to add a personal dimension because, you also had to say that in your case also, for your son's case, they are actually going after it because of political victimization. So I'd like your views on this issue, personally.
No, there's no case involving my son. So I think the expression son's case is not quite right. There's no case. There's no case. And I've said publicly, if you find any undisclosed asset which you think belongs to us, say for example the Express building, I'm willing to write a document selling the express building to the government. There's no son's case. Now, sting operations must be looked upon with a certain degree of caution. Because what is put out in the public domain after a sting operation may not be uncensored footage or uncensored data. Sting operations have to be viewed very carefully. But if the uncensored data, the unedited data or footage shows that a crime has been committed or is about to be committed, of course the public reaction would be one of great revolt and outrage, which I understand. But I think one should be very careful about looking at the evidence that is put out after a sting operation. And the first question that I would, as a lawyer, ask myself is it the whole of the evidence? Or is it only selective evidence?
Mr. Chidambaram, I'm Ajit Ranade, I'm an economist. You know, Mr. Piketty was in India recently, and he said that India's tax to GDP ratio is very low. Indeed, the economic survey documents this and says India's tax to GDP ratio is among the lowest in the world. India's direct tax to GDP ratio is the lowest in the world, and India's spending on education and health as a proportion of GDP is among the lowest in the world. Your 97 budget, called the dream budget by a few people, was the first time that dividend income was made tax-free in the hands of the receiver. And in 2004, you made capital gains also tax-free in the sense that you extended, you brought the capital gains down to 1 year. Both capital gains and dividend income are direct taxes. You just now mentioned that indirect taxes are very regressive. They fall disproportionately more on the poor. Is it fair that somebody who's getting 100 crore dividend income today does not pay any tax, and somebody who's getting 3 lakh rupees of salary income pays an income tax of perhaps 10 or 20%? Isn't it time, looking back, would you not advocate to rethink about the strategy of giving direct taxation on income like capital gains and dividend income and so on?
You see, it's not as this. You make it sound as if it is a simple question which merits an yes or no answer. It doesn't. Why did we shift dividend tax from the hands of the recipient to the hands of the payer? It's wrong to believe that dividends go untaxed. Dividends are taxed, except that it was taxed when the payment was made out, rather than in the hands of the recipient. Why? Because that is a more efficient way to collect the tax. Because a dividend cannot be paid out except by reflecting in the books of account. So at that point, if you tax, you collect the tax efficiently. If you tax the dividend in the hands of the recipient will have 100 ways to hide that dividend receipt. Therefore, I think the CBDT came to the conclusion that dividend distribution tax was a more efficient way to collect the tax than dividend tax. And I fully endorse that view. That is why I introduced it. But the second question still remains. All right, you have taxed dividend distribution at, say, 15% now. It's now 18, at 15 or 20% now. The marginal rate of tax is 30. Are you not giving a subsidy of 10% to the person who receives a huge amount of dividend? Absolutely correct. I think beyond the point, whatever the level can be, that dividend must indeed be taxed in the hands of the recipient also. But that is a very small number. The vast majority of those who receive dividend will perhaps fall, I'm making a guess here, will perhaps fall in the 20% bracket. If they fall in the 20% bracket, that dividend is indeed taxed today, and it's wrong to think that dividend is not taxed. But those who fall within the 30% bracket, I would have no quarrel if the government wants to tax the extra 10% in their hands beyond the level. As far as capital gains is concerned, again, there is a reason why capital gains was exempted. We were trying to encourage people to invest in the capital market. People were investing in real estate. People were investing in gold. People were investing in other unproductive assets. If you want to revive the capital market, people must be encouraged to invest in the capital market. The capital market is pretty nascent at that time. Therefore, to encourage people to invest in the capital market, we said, all right, you invest in the capital market. It is risk capital. You're taking a risk. And if you are willing to bear the risk for more than 1 year or more than 2 years, and if you still make a gain, we will exempt that gain. So it is not a question of direct tax versus indirect tax. There are other reasons which prompted us to exempt capital gains from tax.
My name is Ravi Shankar. I'm with one of the Tata Trusts. I have a question related to reforms, and I'm going to ask 2 questions. One is that on reforms.
Reforms.
See, there's a lot of talk about how India still needs to reform, but nobody has been able to quantify what is supposed to be the amount of reforms and GDP growth. And this is happening at a time every foreign company and academic, intellectual, consultant, they keep on saying that India needs to reform more and more. But you look at the UK and the US, they're probably among the most stringent banking regulations right now anywhere in the world today. Extremely stringent. Nobody seems to raise this question when it comes to India. That's question number 1. Second question, to go back to what this gentleman was saying. Why is that when we talk about NPAs in India, the focus is only on the public sector banks, as if there is no NPAs in the private sector banks? I mean, what is this kind of blacklisting PSUs as if there is something inherently wrong with them, and they tend to generate more NPAs than, I don't want to mention the name of this bank, it's among the largest banks in India. It's a private sector bank, but must have an incredibly large amount of NPAs. And what many people don't seem to realize, that the NPA is not necessarily on the books today. It's all sold off to some ARC. So if somebody looks at a bank balance sheet from there, tries to derive the NPA, it would be a fundamentally flawed figure. So don't you think it's time that people can't even look at private sector banks?
I'm sure the RBI looks at private sector banks also. The RBI is a regulator of private sector banks also. I'm sure they look into the private sector banks. But I think, as a broad statement, the NPAs of public sector banks are much higher than the NPAs of private sector banks. And there is a reason for that. The reason is private sector banks do not lend to those sections of the people to whom the public sector bank lends. Private sector banks don't lend that much to agriculture. They don't lend that much to weaker sections. Public sector banks have certain social obligations which require them to lend to certain sections, which is why NPAs are higher in public sector banks. But nobody is excusing NPAs of private sector banks either. I'm sure the RBI will look at their books also. They should.
Sir, I am Sharad Saraf, Chairman of Technocraft Industries Limited. Personally speaking, to me you are like Amitabh Bachchan of politics, and I enjoy reading every word that you write. Sir, taking the cue further from what our friend just now mentioned about the banking, at the moment the hot news is about the loans that have been given, thousands of crores of loans. There is a joke going around that if you borrow 10 crores from bank, then you lose the sleep. But if you borrow 1,000 crore, then the bank loses the sleep. So, sir, what is your prescription that how do the bank now can manage this and then get along to a healthy lending regime?
See, I answered this question partly a little while ago. You must classify NPAs as willful defaults and victims of an economic slowdown. If there is a willful defaulter, then you must go after the willful defaulter and recover as much as you can. If the banks have been complicit knowing a person is a willful defaulter, or knowing a company is a willful defaulter. If the banks have been complicit in further lending, then the bank managements must answer. But let me tell you, I have never told a banker, lend to A or B. Nor have I told a banker, call back the loan of X or Y. That's not the way government functions. Bank managements must own responsibility for what they did and what they did not do. But if the NPA is because the industry or the company is a victim of an economic slowdown, I maintain what I've been saying for many years. We have a duty to hold their hand until the economy picks up.
Sir, on this, further on banking, when in general in public discourse, you see it in social media, there's this huge outrage against some of the borrowers, calling to hang them. Do you think at a time when India needs to grow and banks need to lend, this is going to impact lending in general in the coming months,
the governor said this, Dr. Rajan in the Ramnath Goenka lecture did say that if you don't make a distinction between willful default and victims of an economic slowdown, you will kill both lending and entrepreneurship. You have to be very careful when you tread on this path.
Mr. Chidambaram, to draw you back to politics for just a minute. So in one of your columns, you suggested that having won Delhi, Arvind Kejriwal must now concentrate on Delhi. In fact, you suggested that for the next 5 years, he should not go out of Delhi.
Either for pleasure or for politics.
Either for pleasure or for politics. And you also said, I think in the same column, that so must Nitish Kumar confine himself to Bihar. Why do you say that? Is it because Arvind Kejriwal and Nitish Kumar lay claim to the space that the Congress considers its own?
No, not at all. You see, there's so much work to be done in Bihar. There's so much work to be done in Delhi. At least in the case of Mr. Nitish Kumar, he has a previous track record. Mr. Kejriwal does not have any track record at all. So before you actually deliver in the state or the territory where you were elected to deliver, you cannot suddenly nurture national ambitions. We are not feeling threatened by JDU or by Aam Aadmi Party. I mean, there is enough space in this democracy for every party to grow. But if I was in Mr. Kejriwal's position, I would deliver in Delhi before I want to spread my wings to Punjab and Haryana. And look what has happened. When he ventured into Haryana and Punjab, he makes one statement in Punjab, he makes one statement in Haryana on the Satluj Yamuna Canal. So I think you must deliver first where you are elected. And I think there are fine examples of people who delivered first before they grew wings.
Mr. Chidambaram, this is Sandeep said. This is on the GST bill because we all believe that once it's passed, it will probably add to the GDP by 1 to 2%. One believes the sticking point is that 18% cap in the constitutional amendment bill. But in the original bill that you had brought, or before that Mr. Pranab Mukherjee had brought, or what was agreed by the standing committee, this was not there. So why do you think this is so important at this point of time? Because this seems to be the major sticking point of that bill.
See, the original bill is not the bill we are debating today. The original bill was obstructed by the BJP without giving any reason. We are not obstructing the bill, but even if you call us obstructing the bill, at least we are doing it for 3 reasons. It's much better to obstruct a bill for sound reasons rather than obstruct a bill without a reason, be that as it may. The bill we are debating is the NDA's bill, and thinking has evolved over the years. So there's no point looking at the original bill as though that was cast in stone. Further debate has taken place, further discussions have taken place in the Empowered Committee of Finance Ministers. further expert views have come in, and a new bill is there. Now, on this 18%, the Chief Economic Advisor agrees that 16% is more than enough. There is a revenue neutral rate. He has publicly said so. And now, if 16% is an adequate GST rate, give yourself a cushion of a couple of percent and cap the rate at 18%. That is our argument. Now, why do I argue for a cap? Now, whether it should be in the Constitution or otherwise is the next issue. Why do we want a cap? We want a cap because in India, the experience has been, if you don't put restraints on government, governments have a tendency to raise the rates, creeping increase in rates. That is how income tax at one point of time, the marginal rate of income tax was 97.5%, driving honest people to become dishonest people. Therefore, it's sound economic advice to have a cap. The question is, should the cap be in the Constitution or should it be in the law? Now, we believe that put it in the Constitution. Answer is, there is no precedent, which I have shown is wrong. There is a precedent. The other argument is, it will be difficult to change it. That's precisely my argument. It must be made difficult to change. The idea of putting a cap is you must make it difficult to change it. But what happens in an emergency? Well, if there is a genuine emergency, why do you believe Parliament will not change it? If there is a genuine emergency, do you think that 542 members of Parliament will abdicate their duty and not change it? But I don't think there is any real argument about a constitutional cap. And there's no argument about a cap. So let the government, I think, in my view, let the government first answer whether it accepts a cap. If it accepts a cap, then we can argue whether it should be a constitutional cap or any other equally efficacious cap.
Hello. My name is Firoz Abbas Khan. My question is that the last 2 years of the UPA government was attacked for being perhaps the most corrupt government India has ever seen. In your view, how much was it perception and how much was it true? Was there any truth in that? Since you were also the Home Minister, I would like to ask you a very short question. Is AFSA a part of Kashmir problem or is it a part of Kashmir solution? That's it.
I wonder how many of you have read AFSPA. I have set out the sections in my column, but please read AFSPA. AFSPA empowers an officer to use violence, to use force, not violence, I'm sorry, to use force, quote, even to the causing of death, unquote. I have not come across any law in any civilized country which carries those words. A police force is not expected to use force even to the causing of death. It can only use force that is proportionate. I think AFSPA is a blot on our country. It should go, lock, stock and barrel. It can be replaced by a more humane law. In fact, the then NSA and I drafted the amendments to AFSPA. In fact, my argument was, if you can't repeal AFSPA, at least amend AFSPA. And I have engaged with Kashmir and the Kashmiri people very intensely for over 3 years. And I'm convinced that if AFSPA is repealed, or if AFSPA is at least substantially amended, it will send a very, very powerful signal from Kashmir to Manipur. You ask Umar Abdullah, he will concur with me 100%. You ask Dilip Padgaonkar, he will concur with me. You ask any of the 3 interlocutors we sent to Kashmir, they will concur with me. In fact, some of my thinking evolved after listening to the interlocutors and after my own interactions in Kashmir. I'm quite clear in my mind, AFSPA has no place in a civilized society. It can be replaced by a law that is moderate and proportionate to the challenge that we face in Kashmir or Manipur or Nagaland. Take Tripura. Tripura is an insurgency-affected state. The Chief Minister there, Manik Sarkar, has got rid of AFSPA in his state. There's no AFSPA in Tripura today. Has Tripura gone out of India? Has Tripura fallen to the insurgents or the terrorists? I don't think AFSPA is a way to defend India's territorial integrity or unity.
Mr. Chidambaram, it's very heartening to hear you say this, but it's chilling too. If a former home minister can say so strongly that AFSPA should be replaced with a more humane law, why was it not done when you were home minister?
We tried, but there are others in the government who are equally intelligent, equally committed to the welfare of the nation, who take a different view. I can't say that my view is right. I believe I'm right, but I can't say that only my view is right, which is why we agreed that we will amend the law. But even that could not be carried through. That, I said, is still unfinished business.
I am Ambi Parmeshwaran, brand strategist. Mr. Chidambaram, we miss the Thirukural in the finance minister's speech every year. So that's something which I used to love in your talks. The question is, I think, take off from what Ajit had raised about increasing the number of direct taxpayers. And I have some data. So there are 360 million income tax assessees in this country, according to some report. And 90% of them pay no tax. Or virtually,
no, not 360 million. 36 million.
36 million. And they pay, 90% pay no tax. 2 million declare an income of roughly 20 lakhs. And you told us that 42,800 have a taxable income of 1 crore.
Admit to a taxable income of 1 crore.
Okay. So
I think there are 42,000 South Bombay itself.
Maybe an 800 in Tamil Nadu. Now, sir, today we can't buy a car without having a PAN number. You can't buy a house without having a card. All your credit card numbers are tracked. Now, why didn't your government, in fact, try and use this big data capability
we did.
To get the other 28 million people to pay tax?
We did. Look at the number of taxpayers, tax-paying SSCs when UPA took office, and the number of tax-paying SSCs when the UPA demitted office. There's a considerable increase. We did. There's no question that we widened the tax base. The highest tax to GDP ratio was when I was finance minister, 11.9%. We took it up from about 8.5% to 11.9%. Therefore, our track record in that behalf is quite good. I'm not saying it is outstanding, but it's quite good track record. But since then, the economic downturn, the global recession has affected it. But every effort must be made to raise the tax to GDP ratio. Of that, you must make every effort that the direct taxes give you the larger proportion. In fact, when I was finance minister, the total direct tax collection for the first time exceeded the total indirect tax collection. So we must continue to press the accelerator to get more direct taxes. I think the CBDT is doing its best, but an economic downturn or an economic slowdown is exactly not the right time to expand your tax base.
So during 97, we had a voluntary disclosure of income scheme, and the government garnered almost 9,500 crores. And then again, we had last year we had another Black Money Act, foreign assets and income tax.
And how much did they gather?
They gathered roughly 4,000 or less than that, 3,500 odd crore. So, do you think it is the drafting of the law that is an issue, or black money per se obsession of political parties on black money as an issue? Is it?
You see, I've explained this on one occasion. There is in this country non-taxable income. That does not make it unaccounted income. That does not make it black money. Farm income is non-taxable. Then there are large number of tax shelters or entities which enjoy tax shelters or tax exemptions whose income is non-taxable. As long as there is a large amount of or a large volume of non-taxable income, it's very difficult to ensure that every pie of that income is accounted for in expenditure. See, let me give you a very simple example. I'm a farmer, you're a doctor. My money is white money. I come to you, you consult with me, you raise a bill of 1,000 rupees, I pay you 1,000 rupees. I'm paying you white money. If you take the 1,000 rupees and give me a receipt, the money is white in your hand. But if you don't give me a receipt, it becomes black in your hand. So white money has become black. Black in the sense unaccounted. You take the 1,000 rupees and take your son to a restaurant and he gives you a bill. Your black money has become white money again. But if you take it to a jeweler and the jeweler doesn't give you a bill, the black money remains black. See, in a country where there's a large proportion of income which is non-taxable income, this money becomes black and white several times a day. Therefore, the correct approach is to go after taxable income and try to see if non-taxable income can be made into taxable income. Now, we can't touch agricultural income because that is not within the power of the parliament. Taxes on agricultural income is with the states, so we can't do anything about it. So leave that out. Nobody is suggesting that farmers can be taxed. Politically not feasible, economically also maybe there's a strong reason not to tax farmers. But there are other non-taxable income, we must move them to the taxable income column, and we must then ensure that every taxable income is taxed, which is how you increase your tax base and raise your tax GDP ratio. A VDIS scheme cannot be repeated every year. It's a one-off scheme. It can be done once in 20 years or once in 25 years. You can't repeat that scheme year after year. If you repeat the scheme year after year, nobody will be an honest taxpayer. There'll be no incentive to be an honest taxpayer.
Good evening, Mr. Chidambaram. Pleasure to talk to you. My name is Deepak Mehta. I have two questions for you. You said you recently visited IIMs and you found 50% of the students were from scheduled castes, scheduled tribes and OBC. I'm not sure whether you got a chance to see the statistics. Recently, I saw statistics that last year in IIMs, where the ordinary student got admission at high 95 percentile plus, the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe seats went at 33 percentile.
So what?
This policy of reservation, which has been there in India in 67 years, has certainly cameras are rolling, so as a political leader, I'm not sure what you'd say, but has failed because the same set of families are getting the benefits out of that and all the other people of the same caste are not getting anything. Do you think this country is doing justice to a large part of the population by continuing with this caste-based reservation policy?
That's a sweeping generalization. When we gave education loans, and that has slowed down now, unfortunately. There was a period of 4 or 5 years when we actually ran a campaign to give education loans. 8 out of 10 loans went to first-generation learners. Their father or mother was either a rickshaw puller or a taxi driver or a peon in a panchayat office, or the lady was vending idlis on the sidewalks of Karaikudi. first generation learners got loans and went to college. What's the point of telling them, you don't make the grade of 95%? How can they make the grade of 95%? How can they make the grade? Their parents are illiterate. There is no tradition of learning in the family. There's nobody in the family to guide this child do its homework or do extracurricular study. The child has other duties. I'll tell you, when we got married and we had our child, we were living in a small apartment in West Chennai. My child was growing up in a house where the mother was educated, the father was educated. We had television, we were watching television, we had books in our home, and we would engage the child in word building exercise. 10 feet away was our milkman, who supplied milk every morning. He had a child too. And that child, when it gets up in the morning, he was a 7 or 8-year-old boy at that time, the first thing he had to do was to milk the cow, wash the cows, feed the cows, and then go to school. Are you seriously suggesting that the two children are equal? That two children are not equal. What is the point of telling a child in Manipur, you are not equal? The child has to trek. Have you been to Manipur? You have to trek 12 kilometers on hills to go to a school. And if you go to a school, there's a fair chance the teacher will not be there on that day. But I think preaching equality among unequals is the worst form of discrimination. Reservation is the only way in which people who have suffered centuries of neglect can be brought up. Look what reservation has done in a state like Tamil Nadu or Karnataka. In Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, the backward classes, the OBCs, have virtually been pulled up only because of reservation.
But what happens, Mr. Chidambaram, when dominant castes like the Patels or the Jats also demand reservation?
But that's a question that has to be answered in the social and political context of that state. Coming from Tamil Nadu, I cannot comment on how the Patels relate to other communities and what the social context is, but I'm sure the people of Gujarat should be able to find a solution to the Patel agitation, just as the people of Punjab or people of Rajasthan have to find a solution to the Jat agitation. If you ask me about communities in Tamil Nadu, I may be more competent to answer how that should be resolved.
But
I agree with him that once you make reservation, the reservation must go to those who are at the bottom of the pyramid among the reserved classes than to those who are at the top of the pyramid among the reserved classes. That part I agree, that we have to give it to the ones who are most deserving of reservation rather than the ones who are less deserving of reservation. That part I agree.
But given the clamor for more and more reservation, would you be open to, let's say, raising the ceiling from the 50% that the
I think
Supreme
this
Court
50% is all Procrustean. There's no logic to 50%. 100% of Nagaland is reserved because everybody there is a tribal. So this is the context of that state. In Tamil Nadu, 69% reservation is perfectly justified. But whether 69% would be justified in UP, I cannot say, unless you study the social composition of UP. This 50%, where do you get this magic number, 50%?
Mr. Chidambaram, you said you don't give free advice. Yet, if I could ask you, what would you say to this government about how to break the impasse in the Rajya Sabha, where it doesn't have the numbers, where your party, despite being only 44 MPs in Lok Sabha, but in Rajya Sabha, you outnumber the government.
This is not the first time where the opposition has outnumbered the treasury benches in the Rajya Sabha. That is the wisdom of our founding fathers. They made the Lok Sabha a dissolvable house that will be dissolved every 5 years. They made the Rajya Sabha an undissolvable house where the composition will change once in 2 years. It is part of the checks and balances of a democracy. But my regret is, a confident government must believe in the strength of its argument, in the strength of its bills, rather than the strength of numbers. If you have a good bill, if you have a good argument, you must be able to pass it in the Rajya Sabha. The last session of Rajya Sabha passed 12 bills. The productivity rate of the Rajya Sabha for the last session is reported to be 120%. Are you seriously suggesting that the Rajya Sabha could have a productivity of 120% if the opposition was an obstructionist opposition? So if bills have been passed in the Lok Sabha, let the government take credit. If the bills have been passed in the Rajya Sabha, the opposition will take credit.
So if I could ask the last question, Mr. Chidambaram, you've said that 2014 was the year of acrimony, 2015 was the year of the acronym. So where do you see 2016 going?
Well, I thought at the beginning of 2015 it will be year of acronyms. As the year ended and as 2016 began, I'm afraid the year has been a year of great polarization. I've said this before. I think Indian society is deeply polarized today. Perhaps the two other occasions when it was even more polarized was firstly after partition, of which I have no recollection, and after Babri Masjid, of which I have a recollection. But today, Indian society is deeply polarized. We meet people of our own kind. The bulk of the people here belong to the same kind. We must go out and meet people not of our kind. Please talk to your Muslim friends. Please talk to your Dalit friends. And then you will realize the angst and the fear and the apprehension among them. We cannot allow another year to pass by just because 5 elections are due this year and 2 or 3 crucial elections are due next year. We cannot allow another year to pass by without addressing the issue of polarization.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chidambaram. And I'd like to invite George Varghese, CEO.
Thank you, and once again I apologize for keeping you all much later than what you had planned when you came here.
CEO of the Express Group, to present a memento.